Developing the Leader Within podcast, leading beyond limits.
Welcome back, everyone. If you haven't subscribed, please do so right now, as it will help us get our show to others and help us get to our next milestone. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Bill Shander. Bill is the founder of Beehive Media, an author, speaker, LinkedIn learning instructor, and data storytelling workshop leader. He is passionate about helping clients and learners communicate effectively with their audiences through engaging and insightful visual experiences. Bill, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we are excited to have you with us. And folks, we will be speaking about the conversations leaders avoid and why they cost you everything. But before we get into that conversation, Bill, tell us a little bit about you that the audience may not know.
Yeah, sure. So let's see. I started my career many years ago, over 30 years ago now. And I started off, in the mid 90s. I was doing like website design and development, all these kinds of things. And I had clients who had data and they needed that data to be shown on our websites. And so I sort of fell into this world of data storytelling and data visualization. And I was invited to do a class for LinkedIn. It was called lynda.com, but LinkedIn bought them. And that was when I transitioned to doing it full time. And I love communications. I love design. I also love the technology. I create interactive experiences and things like that. So, my whole career has been devoted to clear communications using both visual experiences and interactive. And what I found along the way is that really what it's all about is managing stakeholders, really understanding what they need, and then making sure that we do that. And that's what today's conversation is mostly about, as I understand it. And so I'm excited to talk about it.
Well, we're excited to have you over this topic. It's very important for leaders to understand that dynamic. And you often say that stakeholder resistance is rarely about logic and almost always about trust. So, from your experience, what's the biggest misconception leaders have about stakeholder pushback? And what do the most effective leaders do differently in those moments?
Yeah, stakeholder pushback happens for so many reasons. And, I would say the first and foremost one is that most stakeholders don't know what they need. They think they do, they know what they want. But essentially, all humans, it's like the human condition, we're all constantly being driven by our subconscious. We're not really reasoning through problems in an ordered way. We think we are, but we aren't. There's a lot of psychology research to prove that what we're actually doing is we come up with an idea like that, like subconsciously, instinctively, and then we spend the rest of the time when we think we're reasoning, convincing ourselves that the decision we already made is correct. Like this is proven by research. And so stakeholders will then ask someone to do something, which is based on their automated response. And that's usually because, well, this is how we always do it, right? Or, my boss asked me to do it. So when we then say, oh, gee, maybe we could try it this way, that way, some other way, they push back first and foremost because they're like, oh, hold on, what are you talking about? Like, of course, this is what we should do. I said it. I need it. Stop pushing back. Stop telling me I should do something different. So it's ego. It's just the way it's always been done and all those kinds of things. Not to mention, of course, the power dynamic, right? I'm the boss. I tell you to do stuff. You should just do it. And that's something that we have to sort of learn to, it's not so much to resist it, but yeah, learn the technique, the art of those good conversations that make change possible.
Now, you mentioned the power dynamic, and it struck a chord because I remember many times I was asked to do this, do that, and you just feel like, there's an imperative to get this done the way it was said. And in a world
Yeah.
where leaders are expected to move fast and show results quickly, how can leaders slow down just enough to truly listen to stakeholders without losing momentum or credibility?
Yeah, man, it's so hard, right? We are all under the gun, under pressure, but we have to slow it down. We have to, because, think about the opposite. Let's pretend your boss says jump and you say how high and you just start jumping. Okay. And, we've all seen this happen a million times. And actually, let me use a more specific example. In my company, they decided to put in a giant new ERP system, a big IT project. And we spent 3 years and $40 million and thousands and thousands and thousands of man hours doing it. And it was all because, EVP way up here said we need a new ERP system. And by the way, my friend Joe over at that other company, our competitor, he's using X. Do it. Okay, so now we're 3 years down the road, $40 million, thousands of man hours, only to discover, oh, this ERP system doesn't do this key thing that we need. Oops, I guess we'll do another one, right? Like, and that happens constantly on a big scale and on a small scale. So, yeah, there's the pressure to move quickly and just do what you're told. But guess what? The opportunity cost is huge, right? Like if we just slow down a little bit, the number of mistakes and redos and all the rest of it goes away. So get it right the first time, measure twice, cut once. That's what this is about. Do the right thing in the first place, and you save insane amounts of time and money.
And that key area that would have made the difference, right, between a oops and a oh yes, we got this right. It's so critical. And we talk about listening to stakeholders, or listening to people's inputs and things like that. And you've worked with leaders across industries and cultures. Is there a defining moment or a case where a leader transformed a failing initiative simply by changing how they engage the stakeholders? And what lessons should every leader take from that story?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million and one examples. I can share one from my own career, which is, I've had many clients over the years, who are, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, giant corporations, and I've had the pleasure of working on some pretty big, very visible projects for them. One client, I was working on an interactive thing for their website, very important, like one of the key sort of pillars of their marketing every year. And we were sort of taking this giant data set and making a really cool interactive visual experience out of it. And I was redoing something that had already been done by something else a year or two earlier. And we had these great, incredible conversations, these meetings of 12, 15 people in a room to talk about, well, should we do it this way? Should we do it that way? Why, what, et cetera. And the conversations were interesting because frequently you get 15 people in a room, you're going to have anywhere between 12 and 15 opinions, right? And so, these were very complicated conversations. There's technical underpinnings involved, what can and can't be done. There's the complexity of the data. There's the nuance of their clients and what their clients actually needed from this data. And these conversations were just intense. Um, but my role was to not so much make my opinion known and force what I thought should be done on them. It was to facilitate their conversations. And so like the PR guy and the marketing guy and the data guy and et cetera, all these people, they needed to decide among themselves. They're the client, right? They're still the stakeholder. They have their own stakeholders too, by the way, but it's not my choice. So my job is to facilitate their conversation. It's like therapy, and it really is like, okay, hey, so and so said, oh, we should make it into an interactive map, and someone else said, oh, we don't want a map because of A, B, and C. Okay, hey guys, let's talk more about that. Why do you think it should be a map? What do you think about that idea? Sort of getting them to talk to each other, and so that's one of the most important lessons is managing multiple stakeholders, especially when they're in conflict. And the best way to do that is to realize that you're facilitating a conversation. You're not yet another opinion throwing, bombs into the room. That's one of the most important lessons leaders can learn. And it's a really hard thing to do. It takes a lot of practice to get good at it.
Yeah, and as a leader to revert to a facilitator sometimes is hard because
Yeah.
you could see some pitfalls on both sides and then you want to interject.
Yeah. And like to your point, like we talked about the power dynamic before. If I'm up here and these people are even just slightly down here, facilitating them, it doesn't feel like it's my job, right? Like I'm the boss. I should be making the decisions. Well, sometimes they own a piece that they have a valid say in this project. Maybe your job is to step back and not just push down, but yeah, allow that conversation to flourish and really to facilitate. It's a really hard thing for a lot of leaders to do.
Absolutely. And I understand it. But leaders that are listening, if you're in that circumstance, it's time to step back and let these conversations flourish, like Bill just said, for the sake of the end goal, right? And that's really where you have to target, right? And so
Yeah.
our audience spans anywhere from emergent leaders to established executives. So for the emerging leaders who don't yet have positional power, what are the most practical ways they can influence stakeholders above, below, and across the organization without the authority and avoid being ignored?
Yeah. So, one of my favorite books in business is Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. And, he sort of breaks, persuasion techniques into six categories. And each one is really interesting and valid. But one of my favorites, because I've just seen it work again and again and again so well, and we know from a lot of research that it just is very, very powerful, is essentially, he calls it authority, but it's also, you can think of it as expertise. There's a really fascinating study done years ago where they put people in an MRI machine and they watch blood flow to the brain. And essentially, if someone is getting advice, their frontal lobe, which is where reasoning occurs, even though we're not very good at reasoning, like I said before, whatever reasoning there is, it happens in the frontal lobe. And so that's very active when we're getting advice from somebody. But if you do the exact same thing, but the person giving the advice is perceived as an expert, then guess what? This shuts off. It literally like flatlines. What does that mean? It means that we trust expertise so much that we stop thinking for ourselves. So, if you're an emergent leader and you want to persuade, influence up, the best thing you can do is be an expert in something. Now, for the youngest people listening, they may be like, well, dude, I just started my career. I'm not an expert yet, right? Fair enough. Guess what you can do? You can lean on the expertise of others. So, in other words, when I go in and I'm talking to a senior stakeholder above me, rather than saying, gee, I think we should do X, instead, what I will say is, gee, Harvard released a study last week that said that X is better than Y by 42%. Harvard said so? Ooh, wow. Okay. I'm going to stop thinking for myself. Boom, let's do that. So when you bring expertise to the table, yours or somebody else's, it's really persuasive. So lean on that. And you mentioned trust earlier, Enrique. Like every time you do this, you're building trust until down the road, guess what? You're perceived as the expert yourself, not even because you got your own PhD and did 1,000 hours of research or whatever, but because you're the one who always finds great research and brings it to the table. So you can get, gain from the glow of expertise around you just by quoting it.
That's very powerful. And I was thinking while you were speaking about, hey, where you are in the whole chain there, you may not be an expert, for those that are emerging leaders in a particular thing where you reside, that corporation or whatever. But there is an element that you do hold expertise at, and that's where you shine. Own that stuff
Yeah,
and use it until you can get that resident expertise in the job or the field that you're in, and then you can leverage. But that is wonderful to leverage a study that's founded, that automatically makes you, at least makes you sound like, hey, this guy may not be an expert, but they're educating themselves. They're
yeah,
getting data, they're getting things that are founded as something to pad their conversation. And it goes a long way for sure. Now,
it really does.
if you could leave today's leaders with one whisper level mindset shift, something that immediately changes how they approach conversations, conflict, and collaboration, what would it be? And why does it matter now more than ever?
If it's okay, I'm going to provide two things just because, to your point, there's emerging leaders and then there are the established leaders. And I want to talk to both of them. So let's start with the established leaders. I think the most important thing, and I haven't said this yet, is that, we were talking a moment ago about how they need to sometimes step back and just facilitate a conversation. Well, sometimes they're also like they need to actually make the decision and push down. That's fair. But even when you're doing that, senior leader, I want you to remember that you, like all of us, are being driven by your subconscious. So when you assigned your team the task to do X, guess what? That was your subconscious brain, fast thinking, not really thinking it through all the way. Sometimes. Now, maybe 90% of the time, asking them to do X is the right call, but sometimes you may not be doing the most necessary thing. So I want you all to slow down and listen to your people when they try to ask you questions to clarify what you're asking for, and be open to the fact that maybe there are other better ideas out there. So that's your task, senior leader. For the aspiring leaders, I want you to recognize what I just said. Most of the time, when your boss asks you to do something, they're not fully in touch with what they really actually need. Now, it may be directionally accurate, it may be mostly right, but it's always worth a little bit of a conversation to find out if that's the true underlying need. Because when they say, give me a giant ERP system, 3 years, $40 million, et cetera, okay, can we clarify? Because there's plenty of vagueness in there to have the clarifying conversations. And one of the most important things for those aspiring leaders to understand is that those conversations aren't the way we usually think about them. My job when I'm helping a senior leader figure out what they need, when I ask them questions, my goal is not to learn by asking questions, although that will definitely happen. When I ask them questions, what I'm really trying to do, and this is counterintuitive, what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to help them see things differently. I'm trying to help them get to a new insight. So, in other words, my boss says, do X. Well, tell me more about X. Why are we doing X? Who are we doing X for? What's the goal once we do X? What's decision needs to be made, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I will learn the answers from them. That's great. But more importantly, at some point, when I'm asking them these questions, they may say, hold on. You know what? You're right. The decision that needs to be made is this thing, not that thing. So, yeah, maybe we don't need to do X. We need to do ABC instead. It's like therapy, like I said before. I'm trying to get them to see things differently. And like I said, maybe 90% of the time, I'm not going to change their mind. They're not going to see things differently. What they first asked for is 100% correct. Awesome. But 10% of the time, or maybe it's 30, I don't know, they will come to some insight and or there'll be some nuance to the thing that can be slightly different. So the aspiring leaders need to really think about their job that way. You're there to help your leader figure out what they really need from you. Then we're all going to do better work together.
And I can't echo that even more strongly than what you just said, because we all have our roles, emergent leaders and established executives. And those roles, if they're not played correctly, will affect us all, right? So I hope you heed Bill's advice there, because it is sound. Now, Bill, your book is also a lot about understanding what stakeholders need and helping them figure it out. Tell me a little bit about that, and what do you have coming up, and where can the viewer or the listener follow and support you?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the book is called Stakeholder Whispering, and the subtitle is Uncover What People Need Before Doing What They Ask. So, exactly what we're talking about here. And, the basic idea is like we were just talking about. You're driven by your subconscious, so nothing is as it seems, even in work, and this includes your boss. And so, what we need to do is tap into what I call our useful paranoia. Boss says jump, rather than immediately saying how high and jumping, I got to sort of probe that request a little bit more. And I do in the way that I just described. It's about asking questions, trying to get them to see things differently, to really explore what they're really asking me to do. And we're going to save tons of time and money if we do it that way. So, it's sort of the art of the conversation to understand stakeholder needs. And then, yes, a little bit about that persuasion of how to get them to see things differently when you're not in that position of power, like we've also talked about. Um, as far as where people can find me, I am on LinkedIn, of course. So you can just look me up by my name, Bill Shander, and my website is also billshander.com. And there are links from there to my courses, to the book, and probably some other things as well.
All right. Well, folks, we will have all those links as part of the show notes and the video for you to support Bill in his book and all that he's doing as far as the courses. Now, today's episode is sponsored by the Global Trends magazine, The Outlier Project, Bone Frog Coffee, Castle and Compass Adventures, Ascend Meditations, Chop AI, Boomcaster, and Superpass. If you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let us know by leaving a comment. And tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.